Hi, this is another tutorial for Archimatix in Unity, and this time I'm going to show you how to make a runtime controller that's going to allow you to control individual parameters on your Archimatix model, either through like Unity's event system that will patch you into the UI, or I also have Playmaker installed. I'll show you how to get that started. And there's also Bolt visual scripting, which is now free, and I haven't tried it. I did look at a few tutorials and it looks pretty straightforward, so I think you can follow the Playmaker part of this tutorial to see how it goes. I'm going to start with this little roundhouse model that I made in the last video, and if you have built it too, or you have your own models, go ahead and follow along. Let me shrink down. Now, what we want to look at here is in the inspector, this runtime parameters. And if you swing open the little triangle, there's a message here basically saying that how to start making, or how to turn your parameters into runtime. And it's very easy. If you remember this little building, I started with a circular plan, and so I'm just going to take the radius of my circle plan is what I want to make runtime. So I'm just going to swing open the radius parameter, and here's this little expose tick box. Check it on, and what you'll see over here under runtime parameters in the inspector is you now have this live parameter. Now, this is not going to be able to be read by script yet, but it's super easy if you're building a big model and you have a couple of these control parameters to design your whole building and filter down your settings through the Archimatix graph. Yeah, you can just expose the parameters that are useful to you, and then just deal with it here on the inspector. So I'm gonna do a couple more, just so we have a variety. Another parameter that I set up parametrically is this wall height, and you see what it does. It just raises and lowers the top of the wall, but it doesn't affect the rest. As you can see, it can go way down way down past my windows. So I'm just gonna do this one a little more advanced. I'm going to swing open the parameter section, and before I make it a runtime parameter, I'm gonna limit some of these. I'm gonna limit it so it can only go to maybe 10. Woo, that's very tall. 7? Fine. I'm gonna limit it so the maximum is 7 meters, and the minimum is going to be what, 3.8? Does that clear the... Not quite. Let's try 4. Yeah, that's still too short. 4.5. Fine. Alright, so now I've set a minimum and a maximum for this. Even if I send it a value outside this range, this Archimatix parameter is now going to limit it to within this range. And I'm just going to expose that parameter, so it shows up again here in the inspector. And now I can just use this like a normal parameter, and as you see, I can't drive it past the limits that I set. I'm just going to rebuild that. And one more one more runtime parameter, something cosmetic that doesn't really affect the shape. I'm going to maybe grab the window, and I have a radius here, I think is the width of my window. See, it also goes a little bit higher. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to limit it to a maximum of 1, a minimum of 0.25. Why not? And I'm going to expose that parameter too. So now at this point, I have my runtime parameters on the inspector. So I can actually adjust my model here and close out my graph, and I don't have to touch the graph anymore if that's what I wanted to do. But this is not a runtime controller yet. So here's what you need to do to build a runtime controller, and there's a little bit of a setup. So I'm going to flip off my Archimatix graph and go over to my project. And I have a folder here called tutorials. It's just my dumping ground for these tutorials. When I open this runtime parameters, here we go. This is the part of the tutorial finally. You click this create runtime controller. You get this pop-up window, and it's going to create a component script that we're going to attach to our Archimatix model. I'm just going to call this something specific to this model. I'll call it roundhouse. I'm sure I didn't spell it right. Roundhouse runtime controller, and I'm going to save it in that tutorials folder. Hit save, and I get this pop-up window. It's a little misleading. Every time I see this, I'm like, oh, this might take a few seconds, and I'm like, well, it's been a few seconds. Okay, you still have to hit the OK button, and now it might take a few seconds. Okay, so hit that OK button. All right, here's what we don't have. We now have this little component script, but the issue is, and I know my layout is a little screwball for these tutorials, but here's my hierarchy down here. And if I look at the hierarchy of my Archimatix runtime, and I really should have shown you this before I created the runtime controller, is it does create this game object called runtime controller, which if I'd thought to show you the model before I hit that button, it would not have been there. So this is just an empty game object, and at one time when this feature first came online, Archimatix would automatically attach this script to this runtime controller game object. It doesn't now for whatever reason, so you just have to grab the script, drag it onto this game object. Okay, and now you see it's here on the runtime controller game object. It's all clear. You also have this slot where we can load this specific Archimatix model. At least I think that's how it works. And I've never had a problem with this part. I think it has to do with if you have a lot of instances maybe of the same model in your scene, it might help prevent crosstalk, but seeing as how this little runtime controller is actually inside the Archimatix model, I've never had a problem, so I'm not sure that you actually need to do this step, but I'm going to go ahead and just show you that. Okay, so that's the one thing you have to know is that you have to actually attach this script, the runtime controller script, to the runtime controller game object. Okay, now that we have this, what can we do with it? I'm going to show you what should we do first? I'll just show you how this shows up as a UI factor. I'm just going to create UI. What do we need? A slider? A slider is good because basically all of my things are floats. There's a little bit of setup here, so I'll go ahead and clean this up for a few seconds. Okay, so where am I? I need this to make sense. Sorry. Canvas is just going to be screen space overlay. That's fine. Let me go to my game window. I'm going to set a specific aspect just so this, is always showing. It's fine. Okay, in my canvas, I think that's correct, screen space overlay, and my slider. See, I have this empty controller. I'm going to add a runtime controller to my UI slider. I'm going to grab my runtime controller here. This is a lot of runtime controllers, right? I hope you're following what everything is. And I'm just going to drop it into this UI slider. Okay, now I have a few functions that come right up. It knows the difference between the game object, the transform. These are the things that are sitting on that runtime controller game object. Down here in my runtime controller script, right up here at the top, I've got my 3 runtime parameters. And yeah, so that's what I would do. I would just go ahead and probably... What would I do? I'd set these as... I don't remember what my... I don't believe I actually set any limits on my on the circle, so I'll set the limits here, and I don't really... Why didn't you work? Fine, 8 and 3. Those will be my magic numbers. Where are you, my little slider? Okay, here's my slider coming into view. Great. Okay, now I'm going to hit play. Are you running? Okay, and I've got a model that is live, and it has the runtime controller being controlled by my user interface slider. And that's that. I could go ahead and create my other 3 sliders and connect those to the parameters. I could create this into a hideable menu maybe, and there you go. You've got a way to control your model from an on-screen interface or any other kind of UI system, Unity's event system that can register this. Next part, I'm just gonna probably hide this slider. And instead, I'm going to show you how to set up a Playmaker controller. And if you're using script, it will be slightly different, and Bolt is probably very close. So I'm just going to, in my hierarchy, I'm going to create just a new game object. I'm going to call it manager, or something generic. This is going to be my Playmaker brain to control this runtime model, and I'm going to add an FSM. So all I have to do is, again, grab this runtime controller game object from my model, and drag it right down here into my Playmaker state. And again, I get those three options: the game object, the transform, or my actual script component. If I use let's just say get property, here are my parameters. There are a few other things here too, but you can easily find where our parameters are, and they are listed alphabetically here: rectangle height, circle radius, window radius. If these names are not the names that I want, I can go onto my Archimatix model inspector, and I can swing open these parameters, and I can actually rename these. This is just an alias, so it's not editing my graph. It stays the same on the Archimatix graph, the name of the node. And I can just rename these for my convenience, for, you know, for the script control. Notice how the actual parameter name is circle.radius, but the alias makes it circle_radius, so it's a little more convenient for scripting. The other thing, obviously, that you can always do is you can rename your parameters and your node, and it will take the node name and then the parameter name. Let me just jump back to that. My Playmaker manager really quickly. So I can read these properties. They are floats. So, you know, if I create a new variable to track that runtime setting, just need to know if it's a float or an int or an integer or a boolean, and, you know, hopefully Playmaker will set that up for you, but, you know, also use some logic when you do it. The other thing that you do, probably what you'll want more, is let me delete that one. What you'll want more is when you grab that runtime controller and drop it into the Playmaker state machine. What you'll probably want more is set property, and that's where you will obviously, you know, set the values on your runtime parameters. But once you do that, you will probably need to rebuild the model. And what I do is I just break out to another state. And once I've, you know, set all of my variables in one state, I'll pass Playmaker onto a next state. Again, grab my runtime controller, and there's a pretty important command here under script control, call method, and you have two options here: build game objects and build all game objects. And the difference is, as the developer explained to me, is build game objects attempts to build whatever is pending a rebuild. In other words, some of the settings have changed on your Archimatix model, but it hasn't rebuilt yet, and this will attempt to only build the parts that change. Should be a little more efficient. And if that doesn't update, then you also have all game objects, which is basically, it just forces the entire Archimatix model to rebuild. And also in the Archimatix graph, you know, we kind of rely on this rebuild button on the graph, because sometimes, you know, Archimatix gets a little slow when the graph gets full. You also have that option here on the model defaults. Now, where is that? Here it is. Sorry. Automatic model regeneration. Now, this will, like, before when I had the slider and it just updated as I dragged the slider, yeah, you can get away with automatic model regeneration. Just keep that tagged on. But if your model gets really complicated, or you have a system where you want all of the parameters to be reset and then regenerate the model, go ahead and turn off that automatic model regeneration, and you may have to create a button where after you adjust all of your parameter sliders, you just have a button that rebuilds it, or a script function that rebuilds the model. Okay, I think that's all you need to know about creating a runtime controller. And obviously, the temptation is to make our graphs really smart. And I always want to do like all of my calculating, within the graph, within the model, because that's cool. But nothing beats all of the script control that you can get outside of Archimatix in Unity. So, I could have any number of Unity controllers that are going to affect the parameters on my model, or that I need to read the parameters off my model to make changes to Unity. I hope you learned something. Go ahead and subscribe to this channel. It's only Archimatix tutorials. I'll try to put up a couple of videos a week, or as often as I can. Keep creating, and I hope to see you on our Discord channel. We have a lot of conversations there about how to build Archimatix models. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.